Many, many years ago, and it wasn't my time and it wasn't your time, but it was somebody's time, there lived a husband and wife, and it was hot August, not so much as a breath of wind, and the sun was shining, shining hot in the sky. All day the husband had been out in the fields harvesting, and the wife was at home with the babies, curled up asleep in a cradle side by side, two newborn twins, as bald and wrinkled and toothless and tiny as any newborn babes. And the woman needed to borrow something from a neighbour's house, and so she went out of the room and out of the house, closing all the doors tight behind her, and across the road, and she borrowed whatever it was she wanted to borrow. And then she came back, and the doors were open. And they were swinging even though there wasn't a breath of wind. And she ran into the room where the babies were sleeping. She looked into the cradle. And there they were side by side, safe and sound. And she sighed with relief. But then she looked at them again. And there's the bald of hair that hasn't grown. And there's the bald of hair that's been and gone. There's the soft wrinkles of the newly born. And there's the leathery wrinkles of the ancient. There's the toothless of teeth that haven't come, and there's the toothless of teeth that have rotted back to the gums. There's the tiny of the infant, and there's the tiny of the shriveled. She looked at them and she shuddered, and then they opened their mouths and they began to cry. And the crying was so sweet and plaintive that she couldn't help herself. She unbuttoned her blouse. She lifted them in her arms. She offered them her breasts to suck, and they set to like a couple of leeches, sucking and sucking and sucking and sucking until she thought they must have sucked every drop of moisture from her body. She pulled back their little heads, and they were screaming and screeching and keening for more. She put them down into the cradle side by side. She tucked them up tight, and she ran out of the cottage. She ran out of the village to the place where the old henwife lived. Some called the old woman a witch, and some called her wise. And she told the old henwife all that had happened from start to finish. And the old henwife said, "It sounds to me as though you've got a couple of changelings on your hands. Now you listen to me and do exactly what I tell you." And the old henwife whispered into her ear, so close she could taste the old woman's breath on her tongue. And when the old henwife had finished, well, she thanked her with all of her heart. And she made her way back to the cottage. She ran inside, she looked into the cradle, and there they were, fast asleep, tucked up tight. As the old woman had told her, she threw wood onto the fire. She threw wood and more wood onto the fire until it blazed, even though it was hot, hot August. And then she got an iron shovel, and she leaned it against the fireplace. And then, as the old woman had told her, she went out into the yard, and she found a hen's egg, and she cut off the top of it, and she tipped out the insides. And then she went back into the room. And in the corner there was a barrel full of beer for her husband when he came home from the harvest. She turned the tap, and she filled the eggshell full to the brim, frothing with beer. And she turned off the tap, and she put the eggshell into an egg cup, and she put the egg cup onto the floor in front of the fire. And then, as the old woman had told her, she said in a loud voice, "There, that'll slake your daddy's thirst when he comes home from the harvest." And she went out, and she closed the door, and there was a crack in the door, and she put her eye to the crack, and she looked, and she could see the little wooden cradle. And as she was watching, she saw the two little ones sitting up, looking this way and that way with their little wrinkled, wizened faces. And one of them turned to the other, and he said, "Acorn I knew before it was oak, and Adam before he was cursed. But I never heard of the eggshell of beer that could slake a reaper's thirst." And they both threw back their heads, and they cackled with laughter. Well, the woman wasted no time then. She ran into the room. She pulled them out of the cradle. She sat them side by side on the iron shovel, and she shoved the shovel into the flames of the fire, and she held it there till the iron glowed red hot. And all of a sudden those two little ones shruck a shriek. They shruck such a terrible shriek. I hope you never ever hear a shriek like that in all your born days. And they disappeared up the chimney and they were gone. And the woman dropped the shovel and she ran across and she looked into the cradle. And there they were, side by side, two little ones fast asleep, as bald and wrinkled and toothless and tiny and innocent as any mortal babes, her two little twins home safe and sound. And she sighed with relief. And from that day onwards they lived happy, and so may we. Let's put on the kettle and have a cup of tea.